The day I wept, when I saw her tears, something inside me broke. When I saw her tears, something inside me broke. It was a shattering, not of stone, but of a hardened heart I hadn't known I possessed. I'd followed him, this man they called Jesus, for some time now. I'd seen the miracles, the crowds, the way he spoke, and the world seemed to listen. But I was a fisherman, a man of rough hands and even rougher spirit. Empathy wasn't a tool in my tackle box. It was in Bethany, in the familiar home of Lazarus, a man Jesus loved like a brother. We had been there before. The air always seemed a little lighter, filled with Martha's bustling energy and Mary's quiet, attentive presence. This was a safe harbor, a place of peace. But the peace had been shattered. Word reached us, a frantic, breathless message that Lazarus was sick. And then silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that fell upon us as we waited. A silence that was broken by the most devastating news. Lazarus was dead. My first thought was a question. Why? Why hadn't he gone sooner? A quiet frustration began to simmer in the pit of my stomach. We were so close. He could have healed him. He had healed so many others. But he had waited. When we finally arrived in Bethany, the air was thick with the scent of grief and the bitter wail of professional mourners. Martha met us first, her face a mask of accusation and sorrow. "Lord," she said, her voice shaking, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died." It was a dagger to my own heart, a question I had been too afraid to ask out loud. Then Mary came, collapsing at his feet, her body racked with sobs. "Lord," she wept, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Her grief wasn't performance. It was a raw, primal wound. And seeing her like that, the quiet, gentle Mary, was the breaking point for me. I looked at the mourners around her, their weeping swelling into a chorus of despair. And then I looked at him, the man who had walked on water, who had commanded the storms to be still. I expected to see a flash of divine purpose, a steely resolve to perform the ultimate miracle. Instead, I saw his face crumple. His eyes, which had looked at thousands with compassion, filled with tears. He didn't just understand their sorrow, he entered into it. He wept. It was the sight of those tears that broke me. Not the miracles, not the sermons, but the raw, unvarnished grief of the Son of God. He wasn't a distant, impassive deity. He was a friend who had lost a friend. And in that moment, I understood something deeper than any sermon could teach. The purpose of compassion came before the power of a miracle. He wept not for his own inability, but for their pain. Then, with the echo of his sobs still hanging in the air, he walked to the tomb. "Lazarus, come forth." The words weren't a plea, but a command. And out from the darkness, a man wrapped in grave clothes emerged. A miracle, yes, but one that was born from a place of shared tears. That day, the stones in my heart began to crumble. I realized he didn't just heal the sick and raise the dead. He sat with the broken. He wept with the grieving. He felt what we felt. He still feels it. The air in Bethany always felt different. It was a gentle warmth that settled on your skin, a fragrance of olive trees and blooming jasmine that hung in the still air, a quiet hum of life that was utterly unlike the bustling, dusty chaos of Jerusalem, just a short walk away. For me, a fisherman named Simon, who had spent his life wrestling with nets and the unforgiving sea, Bethany was a paradox. It was a place of profound peace that I often found unsettling. And in the heart of Bethany was the home of Lazarus, Martha, and Mary, a haven, a sanctuary, and the only place on this earth where I truly believed Jesus of Nazareth, the man I had given my life to follow, could finally rest. I remember that particular visit with a clarity that has not diminished with time. The sun was high, casting long, stark shadows across the cobblestone paths as we approached. We had been traveling for days, our feet caked in dust, our bodies tired from the long, winding roads and the constant press of the crowds. My mind was a whirlwind of questions and doubts. The weight of our mission, the whispers of the Pharisees, the endless needs of the people. It was all a heavy burden, and I, a simple man, often felt crushed beneath it. But the moment we saw the familiar white walls of their home, a strange sense of calm began to settle over me. Martha was the first to greet us, as she always was. Her face was a study in motion and purpose. She was the heart of the home, a whirlwind of hospitality and care. "Rabbi," she exclaimed, her hands already gesturing toward the door, her voice a melody of joyful welcome. Come in, come in. You must be tired. We've been expecting you." She moved with a speed that defied her years, already directing a young servant to fetch water for our feet, her eyes scanning our weary faces, assessing our needs before we even knew them ourselves. To Martha, love was an act of service. It was in the bread she baked, the way she tidied the room, the ceaseless work of her hands. Her concern for our comfort was genuine and all-encompassing. I remember feeling a pang of gratitude and a little bit of guilt as she fussed over me, a rough and unworthy man. As we settled in, the familiar rhythms of their home began to unfold. Martha disappeared into the kitchen, the clatter of pots and the scent of baking bread soon filling the air. Mary, her quiet, thoughtful sister, emerged from a corner where she had been sitting, her hands still busy with some delicate embroidery. Unlike Martha, Mary's love was expressed through presence. She moved with a grace and a stillness that was so completely foreign to me. Her eyes, filled with gentle light, were always fixed on Jesus. She wasn't concerned with the practicalities of a meal or the comfort of a pillow. Her focus was on his words, on the very essence of his being. It was in the contrast of these two sisters that I began to understand a little more about the man we followed. Jesus didn't just tolerate their different expressions of love. He celebrated them. He would sit with Mary, listening and responding to her quiet questions, and then he would smile warmly at Martha as she hurried past, her face flushed from the heat of the oven. He saw their hearts, not just their actions. He didn't demand that Mary be more like Martha, or Martha be more like Mary. He allowed them to be exactly who they were, and in their own unique ways, they were both offering a love that was pure and whole. And then there was Lazarus. He was a man of quiet strength, a silent anchor in their bustling home. He wasn't as demonstrative as Martha or as contemplative as Mary. He was simply present. He would sit with us, a gentle smile on his face, his eyes holding a depth of understanding that I rarely saw in others. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, his words carried weight. He had an unspoken bond with Jesus, a friendship that transcended the need for constant conversation. Their connection was a deep, quiet river that ran beneath the surface of their everyday lives. To watch them together was to witness a friendship that was built not on shared history or common interests, but on a profound spiritual affinity. Lazarus' love for Jesus was a quiet testament of loyalty and trust. He didn't ask for miracles. He simply offered his home and his heart. In their presence, I could feel the layers of my own hardened exterior begin to peel away. The constant need for a sharp retort, the fisherman's habit of skepticism, the warrior's need to always be on guard. All of it seemed to soften in the warmth of their home. I would find myself sitting quietly, just listening, not just to Jesus, but to the gentle rhythm of their lives. I would watch Martha, her hands deftly preparing food, and think of my own wife, her own hands weary from a life of hard work. I would see Mary, her eyes filled with a peace that I longed for, and wonder what she saw in Jesus that I still struggled to grasp. And I would look at Lazarus, his quiet strength a mirror to the kind of man I hoped one day to be. This was not a place of profound theological debate or a stage for a grand miracle. This was just a home, a place of ordinary life, where the mundane tasks of hospitality were elevated to an act of worship. It was here that I saw a different side of Jesus. I had seen him calm the storm, heal the sick, and confront the powerful. But in Bethany, I saw him as a man among friends. He would laugh at Martha's well-meaning scolding, share a quiet moment of reflection with Mary, and sit in comfortable silence with Lazarus. He wasn't just a rabbi or a lord. He was a welcome guest, a cherished friend. Our time, there was a gift, a brief respite from the relentless pace of our journey. We ate together, we talked together, we prayed together. The simple act of sharing a meal became a sacred ritual. The bread, broken and shared, was a symbol of their unity, a foreshadowing of a deeper communion yet to come. The wine, poured and passed, was a taste of the joy that filled their home. In that ordinary, quiet time, I began to see the true power of his love. It wasn't just in the grand, sweeping gestures. It was in the small, intimate moments. It was in the shared laughter, the quiet presence, the generous hospitality. It was in the way he looked at them, a gaze that held not just love, but a deep and profound affection. The memory of that visit has stayed with me all these years. It has become a touchstone, a reminder of what truly matters. In the chaos of the world, in the noise of my own mind, I can still close my eyes and return to that simple home in Bethany. I can see Martha, her face flushed with purpose, her hands busy with love. I can see Mary, her eyes full of quiet devotion, her presence a balm to my weary soul. And I can see Lazarus, his gentle strength a reminder that true faith doesn't always need to be loud or dramatic. This was the ordinary life that was about to be shattered. The peace of that home, the comfort of that friendship, the quiet joy of that visit. It was all a fragile beauty, a moment of stillness before the storm. I didn't know it then, but this visit would become the benchmark against which I would measure all the pain and sorrow to come. It was a memory of life in its purest form, a testament to a friendship so deep that even death could not break it. It was the memory of a love that was about to be put to the ultimate test. It was, in every sense of the word, a sanctuary. And in that sanctuary, I, a hardened fisherman, began to learn the quiet power of simply being present. I learned that love isn't just a feeling. It's a home, a meal, a listening ear, and a shared silence. And in that home, I saw the face of God, not in a display of power, but in the tender love of a friend. The warmth of Bethany was a memory that had just begun to fade, replaced by the relentless dust of the road and the clamor of the crowds that followed us wherever we went. We had been preaching and teaching on the other side of the Jordan, a quiet time of ministry that was a stark contrast to the emotional intensity of our last visit to Jerusalem. The distance from Bethany was both a physical and emotional buffer, a space that allowed us to breathe and refocus on our mission. The peaceful image of Lazarus, Martha, and Mary, their home a sanctuary of love, was a source of comfort, a quiet anchor in the whirlwind of our journey. It was in this relative calm that the first crack appeared. The messenger arrived, a young man from Bethany, his face streaked with dust and his breath coming in ragged gasps. He found us in the midst of the sermon, a small crowd gathered around Jesus, listening intently to his words. The boy pushed through the throng, his eyes wide with a mixture of urgency and fear. He fell to his knees before Jesus, his head bowed, his voice trembling as he delivered his message. "Rabbi," he choked out, "Lazarus, the one you love, is sick. His sisters sent me. They beg you to come." My heart sank. The words landed like a stone in a still pond, sending ripples of unease through the assembled disciples. We all knew Lazarus. We knew the depth of Jesus' affection for him. Sickness, in that time and place, was a specter that haunted every family. It was a constant threat, a brutal reminder of the fragility of life. But we also knew the power of the man we followed. We had seen him heal lepers with a touch, open the eyes of the blind with a word, and command fevers to break. The messenger's plea was not just a request for a visit. It was a plea for a miracle. A murmur went through the crowd. "He will go," someone whispered. "Of course he will go." We, the inner circle, exchanged glances. The danger of returning to Jerusalem and its surrounding villages was real. The religious leaders were furious, seeking any opportunity to seize him. Bethany was a mere 2 miles from the city gates. To go there now would be to walk directly into the lion's den. I could feel the tension rise, the fear that had been simmering beneath the surface suddenly bubbling up. But Jesus' response was not what any of us expected. His face, which had been a mask of deep concern as he listened to the messenger, softened. A strange, serene calm settled over him. He looked at the messenger, then at us, and spoke with a voice that was utterly devoid of panic or alarm. "This sickness," he said, "is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it." His words left me stunned. Not unto death? The boy's message was dire. The urgency on his face was real. And yet, Jesus spoke of glory. It was a puzzle I couldn't solve. I looked at the other disciples. Philip's brow was furrowed in confusion. Andrew was scratching his beard, a habit he had when he was perplexed. Thomas with his practical, often cynical mind, looked the most unsettled of all. We had grown accustomed to the divine paradoxes he spoke, but this one felt different. It felt like a direct contradiction of a desperate human plea. And then he waited. He waited for 2 full days. Those 2 days were a slow-motion agony. My mind was a battlefield of warring thoughts. Why was he waiting? The sickness could not be so mild as to wait. The love he had for Lazarus was profound. I remembered the warmth of their home, the genuine affection in their eyes. Martha and Mary must be frantic. Every passing hour would be an eternity of terror for them. And here we were, on the wrong side of the Jordan, while their beloved brother, our friend, lay suffering. My human logic screamed for action. We should have left immediately, traveling day and night to reach Bethany. He could have healed Lazarus with a word from a distance. We had seen him do that before. But he did nothing. He continued to teach, to minister to the small crowds, as if the world had not just shifted on its axis. The serenity on his face was a mirror to his divine purpose. But to my mortal eyes, it was a source of mounting frustration. I, a man of action, felt helpless and confused. It was on the 3rd day that the second crack appeared, a fissure that would break me wide open. Jesus turned to us, his face still serene, but his voice carrying a note of profound finality. "Lazarus is dead," he said. The words hit me with the force of a tidal wave. My heart, which had been holding on to a thin, fragile thread of hope, snapped. He was dead. The sickness was unto death. The words he had spoken to the messenger, "not unto death," echoed in my mind, a cruel irony. Had we misunderstood him? Had he misunderstood the gravity of the situation? A wave of anger, hot and sharp, coursed through me. Why did he wait? He, who had the power to save, had chosen not to. He had allowed death to claim one of his closest friends. It was a failure. It was a betrayal of their love. How could he, the source of life, let death win? I looked at Thomas and saw the same anger, the same betrayal in his eyes. He said what we were all thinking. "Let us also go, that we may die with him." It was a cynical, bitter statement. It was not a show of loyalty, but a sarcastic jab at the futility of our mission. We were going back to Bethany, not to a miracle, but to a funeral, and possibly to our own deaths. Jesus, however, remained unshaken. "I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go to him." His words were a balm, a promise, a profound statement of faith that I was too angry and too heartbroken to comprehend. Glad? How could he be glad? The grief of Martha and Mary, the death of a friend. How could any of that be a source of gladness? He spoke of belief, but my belief was crumbling. It was being tested in a way it had never been before. As we began the long journey back to Bethany, the silence between us was heavy and thick with unspoken grief and frustration. The image of the peaceful home, filled with laughter and love, had been replaced in my mind by a scene of unbearable sorrow. The memory of Lazarus's quiet strength was now a ghost that haunted me. He was gone. I thought of Martha, her hands always busy with hospitality. What was she doing now? Was she cooking a funeral meal? Her tears falling into the dough? I thought of Mary, her quiet devotion. Was she sitting in a corner, her heart shattered, her eyes staring into an empty space where her brother once sat? The thought of their grief was unbearable. I knew that the moment they had sent that messenger, they had placed all their hope in him, and he had not come. He had not saved him. The journey was a blur of dust and sorrow. I walked with my head down, my thoughts a turmoil of doubt and confusion. This was the first time that his actions, or rather his inaction, had felt like a direct betrayal. He was the Lord of life, and he had allowed death to claim a friend. It was a mystery I could not fathom, a paradox that broke my logical mind. The news of Lazarus' death wasn't just a fact. It was a fissure in my faith, a gaping wound in my heart. It was a moment I realized that following Jesus wasn't just about witnessing miracles and hearing beautiful parables. It was about standing in the face of death and grief and still finding a way to believe. It was about trusting his purpose even when his actions made no sense. But on that long, dusty road back to Bethany, with the weight of death pressing down on me, I was not yet ready for that kind of faith. I was just a fisherman, a friend of Lazarus, and a man who was walking toward a grief I knew would break me. And I was walking behind a leader who had, in my human eyes, failed. The sanctuary of Bethany was now a tomb, and the love that filled its walls was now a shroud of sorrow. The crack had become a chasm, and I didn't know how we would ever cross it. The final stretch of the road to Bethany was a descent into a world of sorrow. The familiar sights, the gentle slopes of the Mount of Olives, the quiet farms and vineyards, were now viewed through a veil of my own grief and frustration. The news of Lazarus' death had not just been a crack in my faith, but a chasm, and every step we took brought me closer to the source of a pain I could feel long before we arrived. I was filled with a sense of dread, a fear of what we would find, and a bitter anger at Jesus for what I perceived as a deliberate and cruel delay. As we neared the village, the air was thick with the low, mournful wail of professional mourners. It was a sound I knew well, a haunting melody of loss that I had heard at too many funerals. But this time it was different. This time, the sound was for a friend. The sound was for Lazarus, the man of quiet strength, the man of few words and deep loyalty. I could see the signs of mourning on the faces of the villagers we passed, the somber expressions, the respectful silence, the eyes that held a shared sadness. The village seemed to hold its breath as we entered. Word of our arrival must have spread quickly, for a small crowd began to form, their faces a mixture of curiosity and profound sadness. My eyes scanned the familiar houses, looking for the one that held the sorrow that weighed so heavily on my heart. We found it, and what I saw broke me. Martha was the first to meet us, just as she always was. But this was not the Martha I knew. The whirlwind of purpose and energy was gone, replaced by a still and devastating sorrow. Her face was a mass of grief, her eyes red and swollen from crying, her shoulders slumped under a weight I could only begin to imagine. She didn't hurry to us, as she always had. She walked with slow, deliberate purpose, her hands clenched at her sides. There was no joy in her face, only a profound and heartbreaking accusation. "Lord," she said, her voice raw and broken, a fragile thing that trembled with every word. "If you had been here, my brother would not have died." The words were a knife to my heart, a direct and devastating confirmation of my own unspoken fears. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of a truth so painful that it cut through all the theological talk, all the parables, all the divine mysteries. It was a simple human truth. He was gone, and Jesus hadn't been here to save him. I watched Jesus' face as he listened to her. I expected to see a flash of divine purpose, a confident statement of power. Instead, I saw a deep and profound empathy. He didn't argue with her. He didn't offer an excuse. He just listened. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and in his eyes I saw not just sympathy, but a shared grief. He engaged her, not with a lecture, but with a quiet, powerful promise. "Your brother will rise again," he said. And when she spoke of the resurrection on the last day, a truth she held in her faith, he spoke to her in a way he had never spoken before. "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies." But even that powerful statement, a promise of eternal life, did not fully break through the wall of her grief. It was a truth she believed, but it was a truth that felt distant and cold in the face of her immediate, overwhelming loss. She needed not just a promise of the future, but a balm for the present. And so, she left us, the weight of her sorrow still heavy on her shoulders. Then came Mary. Martha had gone to get her, whispering, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." The simple message was enough to bring her out of the house, away from the somber silence and the wails of the mourners. But Mary didn't walk out. She ran. She ran with a frantic, desperate energy I had never seen in her. This was not the quiet, contemplative woman who sat at Jesus' feet. This was a woman whose heart had been shattered, and she was running to the only person she believed could put the pieces back together. She fell at his feet, a familiar place for her. But this time, it was not an act of worship. It was an act of complete and utter despair. Her body was racked with sobs, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably. Her face was buried in her hands, and the sound she made was not the soft weeping of sorrow, but the raw, primal cry of a soul in agony. And through her sobs, She spoke the same devastating words as her sister. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." In that moment, everything broke. Not just for me, but for the entire world around us. Her grief was so pure, so raw, so utterly without filter, that it was impossible to stand against. The mourners around her, who had been weeping with professional grace, now wept with genuine, overwhelming sadness. The disciples, who had been standing in a tense, silent group, now had tears in their own eyes. The grief of Mary was a contagion, a force of nature that swept through the crowd and demanded a response. I watched Jesus. I expected to see a look of divine resolve, a sign that the miracle was coming, that the grand plan was about to unfold. I expected to see the Lord of life, ready to conquer death. But what I saw was not that. What I saw was a man, a friend, who was completely overwhelmed by the sorrow of the woman at his feet. He didn't speak. He didn't offer a platitude. He didn't point to his own power. He looked at the weeping woman, at the weeping crowd, at the utter devastation that had been caused by the death of his friend. He looked at the face of human sorrow, and it broke him. And then he wept. The sight of his tears was the final straw. It was the breaking point, not just for the disciples, but for my own hardened heart. These were not the soft, gentle tears of a sympathetic observer. These were the deep, gut-wrenching sobs of a man who was experiencing profound pain of loss. These were the tears of a friend who had lost a friend. These were the tears of God, weeping for the brokenness of the world. In that moment, all my anger, all my frustration, all my doubts about his delay dissolved into a single, overwhelming truth. He was not a distant, impassive deity who was orchestrating a cosmic drama. He was a man who felt our pain. He was a man who was willing to enter into our sorrow, to stand in the face of death and weep with us. The grief of Martha and Mary was not just a human tragedy. It was a divine tragedy. It was the sorrow the world laid bare before Creator. And in the face of that sorrow, he didn't offer a miracle. He offered something more profound, something more human, something more holy. He offered his own tears. He offered his own grief. He offered his own compassion. I saw the mourners around me whisper, "See how he loved him." They saw it too. They saw the raw, unfiltered love that transcended all theological debate, all power, all divine mystery. They saw a man, not a god, but a man who was broken by the pain of his friends. The grief of Martha and Mary was a crucible in which a new kind of faith was forged. It was the moment I realized that his power was not just in his ability to command a miracle, but in his willingness to share a tear. It was the moment I realized that compassion was not a weakness, but a divine attribute. It was the moment I realized that the Lord of life was also the Lord of sorrow. And in the face of their grief, I, a man of hard hands and a harder heart, finally understood the true meaning of his love. It was not a love that kept us from pain, but a love that was willing to enter into our pain with us and weep with us. The breaking point was not the death of Lazarus. The breaking point was the tears of Jesus. The sight of his tears had been the true turning point. For me, a man of rough hands and an even rougher spirit, it was a moment when everything I thought I knew about Jesus was shattered and rebuilt. I had expected a show of power, a divine solution to a human problem. Instead, I saw a profound, heart-wrenching display of empathy. He wept. The Son of God, the Lord of life, was broken by the sorrow of his friends. The mourners whispered, "See how he loved him." But their words felt too small, too human, to capture the weight of what I had just witnessed. This was not just love. It was a divine identification with our suffering. He had entered into our pain, not as a spectator, but as a participant. And in that moment, I understood that his power was not separate from his humanity, but an expression of it. After a long, painful moment, he straightened up. The tears were still fresh on his cheeks, but new resolve had settled over his face. He was no longer just a grieving friend. He was the master of all creation, and he had a purpose. He turned to the crowd, his voice still thick with emotion, and asked, "Where have you laid him?" The question was a command, a shift in the very atmosphere of the moment. The mourning ceased, replaced by a tense, breathless silence. The mourners, Martha, Mary, and the disciples, all turned and began to move toward the tomb. The final act was about to begin. The grief of the past few days, the frustration of the journey, the overwhelming sadness of the last few moments, all of it was being funneled into a single, terrifying and awe-inspiring moment. The tomb was a cave. A large stone rolled across its entrance. The air around it was heavy with the silence of death. A cold, final presence that seemed to mock our every hope. As we approached, I could see the finality of it all. Lazarus was gone. He was not just sick, he was dead. For days had passed. The natural order of the world had taken its course, and there was nothing left to do but mourn. Jesus stopped before the tomb, his eyes fixed on the cold stone. His next words were not for the mourners or for us, but for a man named Lazarus who had been dead for 4 days. He commanded them to roll the stone away. Martha, ever the pragmatist, was horrified. "Lord," she cried, "by this time there's a bad odor, for he has been dead 4 days." Her words were a stark reminder of the grim reality. This was not a faint, a dream, or a minor sickness. This was death in its most undeniable form. The smell of decay will be a final, brutal confirmation of their loss. But Jesus simply looked at her, his gaze gentle but firm. "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" His words were a reminder, a gentle rebuke of her despair, a final call to faith. The mourners, silenced and in awe, slowly began to roll the stone away. As the stone scraped against the earth, a collective gasp went through the crowd. The opening of the tomb revealed not a body, but a chasm of cold, dark nothingness. The smell of death, just as Martha had warned, hit us all. It was a brutal, primal scent that confirmed what we already knew. Lazarus was gone, and there was no coming back. Jesus then lifted his eyes to heaven and prayed. Not in a plea, but in a clear, resonant voice of thanksgiving. "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me. But I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." His prayer was a profound statement of divine authority, a declaration that what was about to happen was not a trick of nature or a simple miracle, but an act of God. And then, with the full weight of his divine authority and the fresh tears of his human heart, he did something that shook the very foundations of the world. He cried out in a loud, commanding voice that seemed to echo not just in a cave, but in the very fabric of existence. The words hit me with the force of a thunderclap. My heart stopped. The world went silent. I held my breath, waiting, not daring to believe what might happen next. And then, in the suffocating stillness of that moment, I heard a sound, a shuffling, a dragging, a slow, deliberate movement from the deepest darkness of the tomb. From the blackness, a figure began to emerge. A man, wrapped from head to toe in burial cloths, his face a pale, ghostly white, his eyes fixed on Jesus. He stumbled out of the tomb, his arms and legs bound, a living mummy, a creature of the night, suddenly brought into the blinding light of day. It was Lazarus, alive. The crowd erupted, a shriek of pure joy from Martha, a sob of disbelief from Mary, a chorus of gasps and whispers from the mourners. I stood there, frozen in place, my own tears now flowing freely, not from sorrow, but from profound and overwhelming awe. Jesus simply looked at him, a gentle smile on his face, and gave a final command: "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." And just like that, the grave clothes were removed, and Lazarus stood before us, a man returned from the dead. He was no longer a ghost, no longer a memory, but a living, breathing testament to the power of the man who had just wept for him. The shift was complete. The tears of a grieving friend had given way to the command of the Son of God. The compassion that had broken his heart had now raised the dead. And in that moment, I understood that the deepest love was not just in comforting the grieving, but in conquering the source of all grief. The tears of Jesus were not a sign of weakness, but a wellspring of power, a power that could even call a man back from the clutches of death itself. The purpose was clear. The miracle was not just for Lazarus, but for all of us who had lost faith in the face of sorrow. It was a living, breathing proof that love, a love that was willing to cry with us, was also a love that was powerful enough to save us. The tomb was empty. Lazarus, wrapped in grave clothes, stood before us, a living miracle, a testament to the power of a single, commanding voice. The crowd was in a state of ecstatic chaos. Shouts of joy, cries of disbelief, a sudden and profound shift from the darkness of death to the blinding light of new life. I was just as stunned, just as overwhelmed as everyone else. The man who had wept with us had now conquered death for us. The logical part of my mind, the part that had been so consumed with doubt and anger, was shattered, replaced by a simple, overwhelming awe. But as I watched Lazarus being unwrapped from his grave clothes, a thought began to form in my mind, a quiet and profound realization that made the miracle even more powerful. I looked back at the moment of his tears. I remembered the raw, gut-wrenching grief that had poured from his heart as he stood before the sorrow of Martha and Mary. I remembered the silence, the shared pain, the profound moment of communion in sorrow. The miracle of Lazarus' resurrection was not the first one I had witnessed. I had seen him heal the sick, cast out demons, and calm the storm. But this one was different. This one was born from a place of deep, profound compassion. It wasn't an act of power performed from a distance. It was an act of power that came after a complete and total identification with human suffering. The purpose of this entire, painful ordeal began to crystallize for me. He had not rushed to Bethany. He had not arrived in time to perform a timely healing. He had waited. He had allowed death to take its course. He had allowed the human heart to break, to experience the full, devastating weight of loss. He had allowed his own heart to be broken by it. Why? Because the purpose was not simply to show his power. The purpose was to show his heart. Compassion before miracle. The resurrection of Lazarus was not the end of the story. It was the exclamation point on a deeper, more profound truth. The truth was this: he was not a detached, divine figure who solved our problems with a wave of his hand. He was a friend who was willing to enter into our darkest moments with us. He was a Lord who was willing to weep with his creation. In that moment of tears, he had not just felt sympathy from Martha and Mary. He had felt the full weight of human grief, the pain of every family that had lost a loved one, the tragedy of a world broken by sin and death. His tears were not just for Lazarus. They were for all of us. They were a divine statement that our sorrow was not something he ignored, but something he shared. The miracle, therefore, was not an isolated event. It was a direct and powerful response to the tears he had just shed. The command, "Lazarus, come out," was a divine echo of his earlier, heartbroken sobs. It was as if he were saying, "I have entered into your sorrow, and now, with the power that is mine, I will conquer the very thing that caused it." The miracle was a powerful expression of the compassion that came before it. This lesson changed everything for me. I had followed a miracle worker. Now I was following a compassionate Lord. I had sought power. Now I understood the sacredness of presence. The most powerful act he performed was not the resurrection itself, but the weeping that preceded it. That moment of shared grief was a true miracle, the one that broke my hardened heart and prepared me to understand the magnitude of what was to come. The resurrection of Lazarus was a profound sign of his power, but his tears were the ultimate sign of his love. And in that, I saw the true purpose of his ministry. It was not just to heal the sick, but to sit with the sick, not just to raise the dead, but to weep with the living. His purpose was to show us that a God who is powerful enough to conquer death is also a God who is compassionate enough to feel our pain. He wasn't just here to fix the world. He was here to be with us in the brokenness of it all. And in that, I found a faith that was not just based on the spectacular, but on the profound, quiet, and sacred act of shared tears. Continue with this closing impact. I am the resurrection, and I still cry with you. The crowd dispersed slowly, their excited murmurs and gasps of disbelief lingering in the air long after they were gone. Lazarus, alive and whole, was back inside his home with his sisters, a living, breathing testament to a miracle that had just unfolded before our eyes. The atmosphere in Bethany, which had been thick with the suffocating silence of death, was now alive with a sense of wonder and profound joy. As I stood there, looking at the now empty tomb, I realized that my own life had been fundamentally altered. The journey of the last few days, the news of the sickness, the agonizing weight, the devastating grief of Martha and Mary, and the final, breathtaking miracle, had not just been a story I witnessed, but a crucible in which my own faith had been tested and refined. I had seen the power, the words, "I am the resurrection and the life," now echoed in my heart with a weight and a meaning I could never have grasped before. It wasn't just a theological statement. It was a living, breathing truth. He had not just raised Lazarus from the dead. He had proven that death itself had no final say. The grave was not the end. It was simply a pause before a new beginning, a finality that was not so final after all. But the most powerful lesson of all, the one that broke through the walls of my own hardened heart, was the one that came just before the miracle. I remembered his tears. I remembered the way his face had crumpled in grief, the way he had entered into profound sorrow of a broken family. The command, "Lazarus, come out," was a display of his power, but the tears that had preceded it were the ultimate display of his love. The true impact of that day was not in the resurrection of a friend, but in the resurrection of my own understanding of who he was. He wasn't just a Lord of life. He was a Lord of sorrow. He wasn't just a miracle worker. He was a compassionate friend. He wasn't a distant, impassive deity. He was a God who was willing to cry with us. I realized that the promise, "I am the resurrection," was a profound statement of hope for the future. It was a promise that one day, death would be defeated forever. But the tears that he shed, the tears that broke me, were a profound statement of his presence in the present. They were a promise that even in our darkest moments, we are not alone. He is there, sharing in our grief, feeling our pain, and weeping with us. And so, as I walked away from the now famous tomb, I carried with me not just a memory of a miracle, but the memory of a compassion so deep that it could not be contained. I now knew that the Lord I followed was not just a God of spectacular power, but a God of profound empathy, a God who could look at a world broken by death and sin and say, "I am the resurrection," while also looking at a grieving friend and saying, "And I still cry with you." My children, I want you to listen carefully to the story of Lazarus, not just with your ears, but with your heart. Many have seen the miracle, the raising of a man from the grave, as a display of power, a proof of my divine authority. And it was, of course, but that's only part of the truth. That story, that moment in Bethany, was never just about a miracle. It was about something far more profound, something I want you to remember in your own lives, especially when the darkness feels like it's winning. I want you to remember the tears. Before I ever spoke the command that brought Lazarus back to life, I wept. I stood with Martha and Mary in their grief, in the suffocating reality of their loss. I didn't rush to fix their problem or offer empty platitudes. Instead, I entered their sorrow. I felt their pain. I allowed their broken hearts to break my own. My tears were not a sign of weakness, but a wellspring of love, a divine statement that your pain is not something I ignore, but something I am willing to share with you. In that moment of shared grief, the seeds of the miracle were sown. My compassion came first, before the display of power. The resurrection was not an act performed from a distance, but a direct response to the tears I had just shed. It was a promise that a God who is powerful enough to defeat death is also a God who is compassionate enough to feel your pain. The miracle was a testament to my power, but my tears were the ultimate testament to my love. So, when you face your own moments of loss, when the stones of your own tombs feel heavy and unmovable, I want you to remember this. Don't think for a moment that I am a distant, impassive deity, waiting to be impressed by your faith. I am with you. I am in the midst of your sorrow. My heart breaks with yours. My tears fall with yours. You are never alone in your darkest moments. I am the resurrection. This is my promise to you. One day, all your tears will be wiped away. All your pain will be a distant memory, and death will be defeated forever. But until that day, in the beautiful, messy reality of your life, remember this also. I am the resurrection, and I still cry with you. So go forth, my children, with this new understanding. Walk in faith, not just in my power, but in my compassion. And know that in every challenge, in every sorrow, in every moment of grief, I am right there with you, loving you, and sharing in the sacred, human experience of your life.